Welcome back all the respected dignitaries, foreign delegates, guests, participants in the policy dialogue session of Third International Conference on Economic and Finance hosted by Nepal Rastra Bank. I am your MC, Asmita Gorkhali, Deputy Director from Nepal Rastra Bank. The theme for the policy dialogue session is Inclusive and Sustainable Growth Agenda for Nepal. Now, may I request Honorable Governor of Nepal Rastra Bank, Dr. Chiranjeevi Nepal, to take your seat on the stage. Thank you, sir. Further, may I request respected panelists to take their seats on the stage. Firstly, I request Dr. Ram Kumar Fuyal, Honorable Member of National Planning Commission, to take his chair. May I also invite Dr. Swarnim Wagle, former Vice Chairman of National Planning Commission, to take his chair. The next dignitary to honor us with his presence is Mr. Sisir Kumar Dhungana, Secretary, Ministry of Finance of Government of Nepal. I request him to take his chair. May I also request Dr. Lele Song, South Asia Regional Advisor of Asian Development Bank, to take his chair. I'm glad to invite Dr. Louis E. Breuer, IMF Senior Resident Representative for India, Nepal, and Bhutan, to take his chair. It is my privilege to invite Mr. Faris Haddad Jarvos, Country Manager of the World Bank Group of Kathmandu, Nepal, to take his chair. Thank you, distinguished dignitaries. Ladies and gentlemen, this policy dialogue session will be of 1.5 hours. Honorable Governor Dr. Chiranjeevi Nepal will chair the session. Each panelist shall take at most 10 minutes to speak on the theme. Prior to this, Executive Director of Nepal Rastra Bank, Dr. Gunakar Bhatta, will present background on the theme. Now, I humbly invite the paper presenter of the session, respected Executive Director of Nepal Rastra Bank, Dr. Gunakar Bhatta, for the background presentation on the theme, Inclusive and Sustainable Growth Agenda for Nepal.
Thank you. Honorable Governor, distinguished panelists. First of all, I would like to welcome again all the distinguished panelists, delegates, participants in this policy dialogue session. This is new initiative. In the previous 2 international conferences, we didn't organize this sort of the policy dialogue, but this time we are also organizing this policy dialogue to foster some of the ideas, particularly on inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And the agenda that will be discussed here will be beneficial not only for Nepal, but there will be issues relating to the region and the global economy today. Actually, this session, my colleagues, they forced me, instead of saying welcome speech, I should say something on the background so that our distinguished panelists will feel some easier and I can facilitate them. So this is not the detailed paper, but let me see how our economy is going and what could be the agenda ahead. So the broader socio-economic goals is our economic growth, so the low poverty, equitable distribution of resources, and this is the slogan, making Nepal prosperous and happy Nepali, graduating from LDCs to DCs by 2022, achieve sustainable development goals, and graduation to middle income status by 2030, and per capita income of USD above 12,000 by 2043. inclusive and sustainable growth. This is a common agenda, and we are also discussing on this agenda today. Well, if we see that the growth performance of Nepal is not that much astounding, we have to do a lot, and much needed effort is required. So if we see in 1960s and 70s, our growth on an average was around 2%. Then in 1990s, some impressive growth Nepal attained, and the 5% growth on an average in 1990s. And then again in 2000, the growth remained below 4%. So in the last 3 years, some impressive growth performance Nepal has attained, above 7% growth, and this policy dialogue is about to continue that growth momentum. The higher growth trajectory Nepal has moved on. Well, on the inflationary front, Nepal does not have that much problem. Even historically, except in 1990s, our inflation remained single digit. And the financial expansion has been very remarkable in Nepal. So the M2 by GDP ratio in 1960s, even in 1980s, it was below 30%, and now it is above 100%. So the financial inclusion, financial access, financial deepening, we have made impressive performance. The export, if we look at the export to GDP ratio, we have to do a lot. So in 1990s, that ratio was around 20%, and now it has come down below 10%. So much to be done in accelerating our export and attaining the competitive edge in the global economy. Well, Nepal has attained impressive performance in the human development front. Literacy rate, it is around 70%, and human capital index that was low in even 1980s and 1990s, that was 1.31 in 1990, and now it has increased to 1.77. Life expectancy has gone up, and infant mortality has gone down significantly, so there is much exemplary performance on the human development front. In the poverty and inequality, we have made some significant performance. Significant achievement has been attained in the reduction of poverty. So the poverty that was above 40% in 1995-96, it has come down to 25%. In 2010-11, rather, it has come down to 18.7% in 2018. Despite that, increasing urban poverty is a challenge for Nepal. So the government goal is to have higher economic growth, double-digit growth by the end of the 10th plan period. Similarly, the government's goal in the next 23 years to have above 12,000 per capita income and to contain inflation around 6%. And on the social goals, to reduce the poverty to 11% by the end of the 15th plan period and 5% by 2030 and 0 by 2043. And multidimensional poverty index, also right now it is around 28%, and our goal is to bring it down to 13% by the end of the 15th plan and around 3% in 2043. So there are some specified goals on the inequality and life expectancy front in the 15th plan, and in our broader goal to attain by 2043. Given this background, so the issues in the Nepalese economy, again, the socio-economic goals, increasing investment in infrastructure, health, education. Similarly, enhancing access to infrastructure, connectivity, financial resources capabilities, financing the development, and climate change, that is one of the pressing issue. And as we mentioned in the inaugural session this morning also, the coronavirus, and this is also associated with the climate change issue. So this is one of the burning issues to be addressed. And then maintaining macro-financial stability, that is a challenge, along with the expansion of growth path. I'm about to conclude my presentation. Just I would like to show here that, and one of the important issues that we have to address is to enhance and increase our spending, our research capacity is to be developed. If we see this, so the research spending as a percentage of GDP is above 2% in the advanced economies. And looking at the data in our context, it is around 0.3%. So we need to increase the research spending in Nepalese economy, and that is a challenge. And the demographic dividend that we have been enjoying over the years, it may not be continued in the next 20, 25 years. And the trend of the population growth, it also shows that. So in the later part of the past century, there was significant demographic dividend to a number of countries, and after 20 or 30 years, after 3 decades, there will be no more demographic dividend. So in this, particularly the spending, enhancing our research capacity, increasing our spending on research and development, and to address the issue of the demographic dividend that we may not enjoy after a few decades. So how to strike a balance in this issue will also be an agenda that our panelists will discuss today. So with this, let me stop here, and I would like to request Honorable Governor to chair this session and to give space to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunakarji. You have highlighted the major concern about the sustainability and inclusion growth agenda for Nepal. We have a panelist, a distinguished panelist, and a scholar, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me start from my right side. Lee Song, the advisor of ADB, his view on especially sustainable development with inclusive growth. How do you see it? You have a 10, and each participants, panelists, they have a 10 minutes. So please, just floor is yours. You can go for it.
Thank you very much, Governor. And thank you very much for the Central Bank inviting ADB to this very important and stimulating conference. So my name is Lee Song. I'm coming from ADB, and I'm based in New Delhi, covering South Asian 6 countries, economic studies and research. And I would like to advertise ADB's book first. We released the book in January, very low profile. We will do that in our annual meeting in early May again. So the book titled A Road to Prosperity, 50 Years of Asian Development, Technology, Policy, and Market. So we try to summarize what has happened in the past 50 years, because ADB was established in 1966. So roughly 50 years, a little bit over 50 years, and we cover a little bit over to also the 50s. Then try to summarize the experience and the lessons of development in Asia. So we're covering all ADB member countries, including Nepal. And the book actually is already on ADB's website. The soft copy, then you can download, then you can have a look. This is our ADB's attempt. And hopefully we can have a big impact like what the World Bank has done in the 1993. Because 1993, you remember World Bank released a book on East Asian Miracle. But it's only cover East Asian. But now ADB's book would like to cover more, and we cover a lot of chapters. So that's the book you can have a look about development, and it would be very relevant for development in Nepal. So my talk, I would cover actually some lessons we learned from the studying of Asian development in the past 50 years. And I just want to cover 3 most important things in my view on the Asians' development in those successful countries and those not so successful experience. And the 3 things, one is actually the minister has already covered in his speech. Very nice speech. And he said we are now in the period of transformation. And some conventional wisdom may not work in the future because of all these changes. But actually, I would like to cover some conventional wisdom, because those conventional wisdom are tested by the history and probably would also be useful in the future. And the minister himself actually has already covered in his speech. So the first is the importance of the government, importance of the state. He has already said in his speech, the state is really important because state has to provide the infrastructure, not only the fiscal infrastructure, but also the social infrastructure, including the institutions, governance, then to the society, and to the private sector, to the market. This is how the state to provide in the complementary role and the supporting role for the private sector, for the market to function. This is really important lesson we learned from the 50 years of Asian development. But also, on the other hand, we also see some countries, some of them actually are also in South Asia, have a large state print in the economy. So state has a role, a supporting role, but if the state involved in the business, as the minister said, then probably you've got some issues. State-owned enterprises can be very inefficient because their incentive mechanism is quite different. And then the subsidies provided by the state to certain sectors would distort the market, give wrong incentives, then the economic behavior could change. So there's a balance between the supporting role of the state as well as the role of larger state print in the economy. So this is one issue I would like to raise and for your information. The other is actually the role of the market. When we studied the last 50 years Asian development experience, actually our view is the market-oriented reform played a significant role. The market is extremely important. The market, particularly a competitive environment, could allow the private sector to respond to opportunities. This is where you would support the market to support the competition in the economy. And this is why we always encourage market-oriented reform. Although you may not agree with the Washington Consensus, because the Washington Consensus emphasizes too much about the market. But market plays a fundamental role. This is a conventional wisdom. I believe this would also play a role in the future. So market is extremely important, and we need to limit the monopolistic behavior. So not only some monopolistic behavior by the government when the government is involved in the business, but also by the private sector. Nepal is a small economy. The market is quite small, so certain times the private sector players could play a very monopolistic behavior in the economies. So the government has to regulate the market and to make the market functional. And the central bank actually, you play a significant role in this well-functioning market because you provide macro stability and all the financial system, payment systems, all these things. So market is extremely important. The third point I would like to emphasize, and we learned from the past 50 years, is openness. Openness is extremely important. And this is, we can see from East Asia, from Southeast Asia, and the successful countries usually they would open. Although the international environment, as Minister said in his speech, has changed largely, and there's a retreat from globalization. But for small economies, for developing economies, openness is vital for your development because domestic market is so small, you have to rely on the international market. So for small economies, we have to advocate openness, global openness, but for small countries, you would also open to international investors. FDIs definitely would be extremely important, and FDI only less than 1% of GDP in Nepal. And attracting FDI is very difficult because so many things have to work well together and the foreign investors would come. Not only political stabilities, infrastructure, human capital, all those things, you have to work really hard to attract FDI. But once FDI comes, it will bring benefits I think everybody understands this. But then openness also includes openness to trade. And even when the global system is under retreat, but for countries themselves, for small developing countries themselves, we should open for the trade. With open to the trade, actually you can bring competition to your country. Then you can facilitate the competition in your domestic market, and then to let the private sector to respond to market opportunities. So this is, I think I would stop my speech here, and I just emphasize some conventional wisdom which are tested by the history. And ADB has done a book on this history of Asian development. I encourage you to go to the ADB website to look at this book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lily Song, South Asian Regional Advisor. He mentioned about the 50 years experience of ADB. Basically, three important parts that we have to look over for the development: state support and market openness and the free market. These three areas are vital for the economic development, he mentions. Thank you so much, Shuang. May I say Shuang? Yeah? Are you comfortable? Okay then, Shuang. Now let me say our World Bank partner for is that we want to hear his view on this sustainable and inclusive growth agendas.
Thank you very much, Honorable Governor, respected Secretary, colleagues, friends. This is on behalf of the World Bank. I hope you can hear me because the microphone is a bit low, I think. So let me try. It's very difficult, I have to say, to speak about such an important topic, and I try to move quickly. I have a lot to say, as you can imagine, on this. But it's very hard to speak when I'm sitting in a panel with such distinguished colleagues and very accomplished economists and things of that sort. Not only because I'm sure they're much smarter than I am and experienced on Nepal. I've only been here for less than 2 years, but also it's hard. It's very important to find something that is different from what they're going to say. I don't think we've been chatting a little bit and making sure. I don't think what you hear from us is repetitive, but what you will hear from us is common things, which reflects that there is, I think, a clear consensus on Nepal in terms of the challenges for inclusive growth and the opportunities. So I think many of us are like-minded, not because we're like-minded, but because evidence and data and experience and common sense would mandate that it be so. So let me start very quickly just try to sort of, from my side, lay out the storyline, a little bit of a storyline. I won't go into much depth on this issue of inclusive growth, but really to sort of even to aid ourselves in trying to see how we can envision this narrative for Nepal in terms of inclusive growth. I'll start a little bit by defining what we mean, at least what my understanding is of inclusive growth, then speak about Nepal's prospects, challenges, and the role of government, international financial institutions can play in it. So what is inclusive growth? And obviously you all know this, but it's good to sort of remind ourselves because it is something that's used very often. It's basically a growth that benefits all groups in society, particularly the poor and those that are disadvantaged and marginalized. And that marginalization is very sui generis for different countries. This means engaging basically a large part of a country's labor force in productive activities, while also promoting equality of opportunity in terms of access to markets, resources, and an unbiased regulatory environment for business and individuals. And this is what the Honorable Minister was saying when he was talking about the history of liberalization. We found that liberalization may have sort of delivered growth in the past, but that growth may not have necessarily become one that was felt for everyone. At the same time, certain social policies, while well-meaning, if not underpinned by growth, will not be sustainable. So the issue is, how do you find the balance and how do you find the middle way in this world? And it's all about, whether it's in philosophy, way of life, or even economics, believe it or not, the middle way and individual sort of storylines are very important. So I guess the story is that the pace and the pattern of growth matters for inclusion and accelerated poverty reduction. And at the end of the day, irrespective of where you come on the storyline, we all see, and evidence shows, that emphasis, if you want to achieve inclusive growth, emphasis should be on productive employment and productivity growth, rather than just income distribution or redistribution. So how do we get there, and what is this? What are the prospects for Nepal? Let me just start by saying that in the case of Nepal, the prospects and the horizon we are very positive on, and we think this is strong. Nepal can achieve, we believe, the growth target of 7 to 8% needed to reach middle-income country status by 2030, and also do it in a way that is inclusive and sustainable. This is not outside the reach of this country, nor its people. In fact, that's why we're here. But let's look historically a little bit about Nepal. Nepal has actually been able to generate inclusive growth. And you'll forgive me for saying this, and it's a bit controversial what I'm about to say, but I must say it because I'm here with academics and truth seekers. Historically, perhaps with Grey Wheels, some of it has been by accident that it has been able to achieve so. There has been a heavy reliance on remittances, which have averaged 25% in the past 3 years, and the good fortune of an early transition through a demographic dividend, which Nepal had gone through with a low fertility rate, of about 1.9% in 2019. So those two sort of favorable winds really worked in Nepal's favor. In the case of remittances, they've enabled the economy to cope with low average GDP growth in the past and low employment. Households have traditionally used these funds from remittances to invest in education and health, and this has improved social outcomes, and thank God for that. That's actually a good thing. Out-migration of labor has also contributed to some movement of labor out of agriculture and rural areas to the urban, low-skilled service sector, where wages and earnings are higher relative to subsistence farming. Remittances have also been a source of foreign exchange and government revenue, which actually have resulted in an average savings rate in Nepal in 2019 of 52% of GDP. Which is actually considerable. On the other hand, the demographic dividend allowed growth in the working age population or labor force to outweigh growth in the dependency population, children and those aged. This has created a window for higher inclusive growth because the economy can potentially employ more people than it otherwise would have. This in turn contributes to higher savings that can finance investments, etc. So the result has been that poverty and human capital income, despite the fact that this was a result of somewhat, to some degree, good fortune, has been strong despite the tepid growth in the past, and we're talking about in the past. Nevertheless, Nepal's poverty and human development outcomes are among the highest in the region and at par with its peers. Within 7 years, Nepal has cut in half the poverty rate significantly and reduced income inequality. So that is considerable. Primary enrollment rates have also increased from 66% in 1999 to 97% in 2016, with a lot of data, including expected years of schooling, not only being higher than the South Asia regional average, but that indicator itself is at par with that of middle-income countries, which is actually pretty impressive. So, this is good stuff that have gotten us to this point. And now, however, the narrative has changed. And in addition to this, and what we should be doing is we have a window of opportunity with a new constitution, a new government, a new planning horizon, governance horizon that is more than a few months to a 5-year horizon, where we can actually build on this and take advantage of one of the many additional resources that Nepal has, which is a longer-term planning horizon by which you have a government that can plan for beyond than 10 months and can think into 5 years and beyond. And this is an incredible resource. And now the milestone for us is to achieve middle-income country status by 2030 with a new growth model based on higher levels of investment, productivity, and effective public institution, with the aim of, again, the middle way, the balance, facilitating private sector dynamism within a broad narrative of social development and social justice. somewhere in the middle that meets the Nepali needs. So that is an opportunity. What are the opportunities, as I mentioned? Political stability, where this political stability is very important and brings tremendous opportunity to raise investment, particularly FDI. And FDI, at the end of the day, is not about money. Money is important, but I tell you, some of the things that I've observed this year, we look at, well, this year FDI over GDP has been this way. That doesn't matter. What FDI brings, in addition to money, which is important, it brings skills, it brings experience, etc., which if FDI comes in 2020, the impacts of that will be felt in 2024, 2025, 2026. So this is a lagging indicator. The monetary value of FDI, big projects, etc., is on year one. The real value in terms of productivity, sharing of experience, technical expertise will come year 5. In the case of natural resources sectors, usually it comes in year 7. And this is the importance of it. It has massive potential. So I think we have an opportunity now to focus on this issue of political stability to actually put in place key issues and to drive growth. So I think that's one opportunity. So in that sense, I think the opportunity to improve the business investment environment, particularly for small and medium enterprises, is very important for Nepal. We all agree, all of us are here, we have, in my humble view, a visionary government, a minister of finance who sees the big picture and he sees the long horizon. He sees it on both ways, and I think there's no doubt on that. I think it's very important. I think the need to find a way to bring in not only foreign investment in terms of money, but technology is critical. But also, we need to also focus not on the big things, right? The big things are very important. These big hydro, in fact, the World Bank and others, ADB and others, are focusing on the big sectors. I think those are very important to trigger that benevolent cycle of growth and investment in Nepal. However, let's remember one thing. SMEs, small and medium enterprises, make up more than 96% of the total industrial establishment and account for 83% of industrial employment of industrial employment in the country. They contribute 80% of the industrial shares contribution to GDP. And FDI, even in the smallest pop and mom shop, the smallest thing, anything below, and there's a threshold now, below this threshold of 500,000, where you can bring foreign investment, you can bring any type of investment, even opening a restaurant is what will drive Nepal's development at the end of the day. Germany is used to be considered, is used as a model of an industrial giant. Germany, Mercedes-Benz, all these technologies. Let's remember that the German economy is actually driven by micro and small medium enterprises. They account for a greater share of growth than the big transactions. And those are the guys we need to focus on. Another opportunity, and I will stop, I know I've been speaking at length, but you can see I'm very passionate about this, federalism. An opportunity to reset, insofar as many of these things that have been holding back constraints to investment, constraints to growth, constraints to public investment management, public sector public service delivery. Not only in Nepal, in any country, including my country, we are, they say the chains of habit are too weak to notice until they are too strong to break. And Nepal is also subject to chains of habit in terms of how we administer public investment, etc. That is a legacy. With the federalism transition, the creation of 7 new corners to the country, 753 new palika, you have a chance to reset the model, reset incentives for civil service delivery, for public sector delivery, and I think that's very important. So those are wonderful opportunities. Challenges, increasing FDI reforms, reforming tax policy and administration, which is very important, and getting the most out of migration and remittances. How do we change it from remittances transferring into consumption to remittances transferring into investment? And this is where the investment climate is important, because remittances are and will always be important for Nepal and are part of its diversification strategy, but they should be translated into productive investment. And then other instruments, the depth of the financial sector. We talk about bringing foreign investment into the country. Foreign investment comes in different ways. A deeper, and I know this is something that the government and the Honorable Governor is really focused on, and we are very honored to be part of the reforms they are doing, looking and extending different options for insurance, for long-term finance in the country. You need, for big, sophisticated investors, to offer them big and sophisticated instruments in which they can invest and they can hedge their risks and things of that sort. And I think that's very important. Last but not least is this issue of higher productivity. Investment is about bringing in new capital at first glance. That's the short term. That's what shows up at the FDI over GDP numbers. But the 6-year, 5-year lag that I talk about is the productivity. Is that amount of capital, for that $1 million of capital, how much output are you producing? And that's productivity. That doesn't come from money. That comes from know-how, doing things differently, tapping export markets and things of that sort. So bringing in large amounts of money to produce with $1 million, 10 pieces of something is the short term. With that 1 million, making you produce 100 pieces of that something is a productivity thing, which is the technical expertise that Nepal and many other countries need to focus on. So I think, this is basically the challenge, but a lot of opportunities. At the end, let me conclude by saying, the role of government, there's no golden model for this. There's no magic bullet. Every country has a different model. But Nepal has a wonderful window of opportunity right now. You have some wins in its favor. There's a lot of things happening. There's a chance to reset some of the economic model in a way that meets the needs of the country. I think at the end of the day, and this is maybe me repeating the Honorable Minister when he said this, that, at the end of the day, it would seem to me, as somebody who's only been here for 2 years and trying to understand what the aspirations of the Nepali people are and how we can help, that your model of inclusive growth is one that is fueled by market-driven sources of growth, but where government sees its role as playing a facilitating role by ensuring that the business environment supports competition and higher investments. Higher levels of FDI would help bring in much-needed skills and technology to support productivity, most importantly, and growth. And also, timely implementation of the relevant reforms would help ensure that the business environment encourages not just the big guys and the private sector and those that we know. I have my friend Shekhar here, who represents FNCCI, and he's a key collaborator, key friend, and we work very closely on a number of things. But the private sector I think about is not him. It's those that have not yet existed. It's the young Nepalis, 20-year-old, who want to open a joint business, an IT company, who want to open a cafe and a restaurant, and need access to finance, access to predictability, and a civil servant that will not change his views depending on his structure. We have 2 minutes remaining, and I think that's what we're working on. But I've done it in less than 2 minutes, so that's okay. And I've given you a lot of very valuable stuff. So in conclusion, let me thank you, and let me just say one thing, that at the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunities. I think Nepal is in a place where the opportunities are there, are massive. The challenges are still young enough and fertile enough to be converted to opportunities. And I think this is what we need to focus on. So it's a wonderful situation. And a challenge that is tackled can be converted to an opportunity. A challenge that is not tackled will become a threat. And I think we're still at a very positive point. And on behalf of the World Bank, we look forward to working with you on all of these. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Faris, Country Manager, the World Bank Group, Kathmandu, that you have highlighted the Nepalese economic insight. And I think the World Bank is happy with the development, what we have, the policy, what we have changed during these few years. Anyway, you have given this new model of growth. Really, we have to think on it. Anyway, your views, really appreciating views. Now, I think let's hear from Lewis Berger, the IMF senior representative, resident representative to India, Nepal, and Bhutan. Lewis, please, your floor.
Thank you very much, Governor, Honorable Governor, Finance Secretary, guests, friends. Let me start by thanking the NRB for this wonderful event. It's very impressive to see such a collection of leaders, intellectuals, scholars, civil servants, private sector of Nepal coming together, people with very busy schedules, to think about their future, to think about their economy, and to exchange ideas to try to improve the situation of the country. It's quite an impressive event, and it's a great privilege for me to be part of it. My name is Luis. I come from Latin America. I'm the IMF representative in Nepal, and I cover a couple of other countries in the region. And I'm also want to take this opportunity to thank the governor for the space that the NRB has given the IMF in your country. As you know, the IMF basically does three things. It lends money to countries that are under stress. It gives policy advice to countries, especially during the annual consultation that we do with member countries each year, and it provides training and technical cooperation. Of these three things, we're heavily engaged with the Nepali authorities on policy dialogue and training and technical cooperation. In fact, some of you know that the IMF opened, with the support of Nepal, a training center in Delhi called Sartak. And I see it as a university, a small specialized university in postgraduate policy economics. And we've seen some very impressive civil servants from South Asia, including, of course, Nepal, participate in the events and share their knowledge, share their experience, ask their questions, and in the process start the regional dialogue so that Nepalis and Indians and Sri Lankans and Bhutanese and so forth can search for their own answers to their own issues. I would like to provide some brief thoughts on the issue of inclusive growth. I will never expect to know as much as Nepalis know about their country, and certainly we have a very selective group of people in the panel today from Nepal. What we're trying to do is to bring an outside perspective. In the IMF, we spend a lot of time trying to understand what's happening, not only in the countries we work, but in those countries that affect the countries that we work. Of course, the coronavirus being the issue that is in everybody's minds, including inside the IMF these days, but broader than that. So we want to bring an outside, global, and regional perspective to our conversation on policies with the authorities, and we want to bring a medium-term perspective. We don't pay too much attention to the news reports of today, though we read the newspapers carefully. We focus on the medium term, 5 years and beyond. And in the context of inclusive growth, there are many things we don't know. We're not experts on inclusive growth. We have experience on policy economics on a few issues very deeply across many, many countries for the last 60 years. And there are a few things we know. Inclusive growth takes time. Today's advanced countries took a long time to reach their level of prosperity and safety for their people, sometimes centuries. China, which is the biggest change to the global economy in the last 30 or 40 years, took 40 years. And that was very quick, but it was 40 years, not 5. And they're still working at expanding prosperity beyond the coastal regions. So this is a marathon. It's not a quick solution. Now, Nepal faces a unique opportunity, which many countries in the world do not, and that is your demographics. You have a young population, a growing labor force, and that is an opportunity. It's also a risk, because if the economy does not generate the jobs that this emerging generation demands, a generation that is more demanding, that has higher expectations about their own lives, then that could lead to social disruptions and further emigration and so forth. but to face the social challenges of this emerging generation. One way to see this is to analyze how countries can make their economies investable. Growth means investment. It means productivity. It means producing more with the same amount of machines and labor, increasing the smartness of production. But it also means higher investment, not only in public and private investment like roads and factories, but also in the soft infrastructure, the institutions upon which the economy operates. Where is Nepal today? In a remarkable place. We heard the Honorable Minister of Finance, the Honorable Governor of the NRB, describe a new Nepal, the reconstruction of Nepal. And really, you have come a long way in the last few years. From the end of the conflict to the new constitution, to fiscal federalism, to a new government. If this was not enough, you had to face a devastating earthquake. And yet you're here after 3 years of rapid growth with economic stability, and that is quite an achievement. It is an impressive achievement. You've put the problems, some problems in the past, and you've achieved the economic, the social, the political stability, the higher energy production that gives you the opportunity to pursue your own aspirations as a country. How to go about it? There are so many needs, there's so many pressures, there's so many opinions. How to proceed? Well, again, not claiming to have the truth, but bringing an outside picture of how we saw other countries react. I think a policy strategy that has two pillars is quite important. Number one, as mentioned by both the governor and the minister, protect the stability you have. That is precious, and I don't need to tell you about it. You know this better than any of us do. Protect that economic stability, protect that social and political stability. That means in the economic sphere, pursue prudent policies. There is, I perceive, a gap between the aspirations of Nepal and the economic realities. It is true that the economy grew very fast, as pointed by Dr. Gunakar, in the last few years. Now that growth was a bounce back from the earthquake. It is highly unlikely that the economy in Nepal can grow on today's policies, 8% a year in a sustainable way, and it is more likely that if that growth is pushed beyond what the economy can sustain over a long period of time, you will have a balance of payment crisis. You will run out of foreign exchange, and you will have stress in the price of the rupee, the dollar, and so forth. So maintaining a growth rate that is sustainable over many years is very important, and on today's policy, we see that rate between 5 and 6%, perhaps closer to 5 than to 6, but this can be increased with the right policies over time. Maintain prudence means keeping the budget deficit under control. A budget deficit above 5% of GDP is very difficult to finance in a stable way. Protect your policy buffers, your international reserves, your low level of public debt, and so forth, because your economy, like many others, is constantly hit by shocks. Today, you're being hit by 3 shocks: by coronavirus, the impact of which we really don't know, by the slowdown in India, which has affected your own growth, and by the lower price of oil. So good and bad shocks. Maintain your policy buffers. improve the budget as a policy instrument. Both projections and spending in the budget are much higher than what actually happens. If a Martian were to look at the budget of Nepal, they would say this is not a very safe bet for the financial stability. But the budget is an aspirational document. What you do as a country is much more prudent, and you have maintained fiscal discipline, and that is quite important. On the monetary field, strengthening the central bank is very important. We are intimately knowledgeable of the many initiatives that the central bank, the NRB, is pursuing to modernize its toolkit, to improve the way it controls inflation. The governor referred to the interest rate corridor, which is a framework to fight inflation. And that is a very good thing. The NRB is strengthening how it supervises the financial sector and how it regulates banks. That's a very good thing. The central bank took a number of very difficult actions to strengthen, to tighten macroprudential policies.
Lewis, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. And these are things that have led to reducing vulnerabilities and macroeconomic risks. So the pursuit of prudent policies combined with institutional building, particularly on federalism, is very important. Making the country investable is also necessary to build on the many things that have been happening in the last few months and years to improve the business environment, including changes to laws, a single window, and so forth. So a policy that protects stability, modernizes the soft infrastructure upon which the economy pursues, is in our way the method that many countries use to reach their development aspirations, and we are very hopeful that Nepal will be able to continue this very good moment that you're going through and in time reach your own aspirations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, the IMF senior representative to India, Nepal, and Bhutan. We really agree with your views. The inclusive growth takes times. Since 3 years we have a good growth, but it should remain for decades. That is the major concern. So that the policy, the modernization of policy must be there. The FDI is a very important thing there for the country, and he mentioned about it. We all agree on it. Now, we want to hear from the Finance Secretary, Shishir Dhungana. Shishirji, floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Governor. Honorable Governor, Honorable NPC member, ex-VP of NPC, BC of NPC, colleagues from the development partners, senior officials from the Central Bank, delegates, media persons, and others. First of all, I would like to give NRB, thankful for NRB for giving that opportunity to speak about what are the issues and what are the areas that the government of Nepal is intervening for sustained and inclusive economic growth in our context. I read an article along the way having said that the growth without creating the job and protecting the voices as well as without promoting the future will not be as a sustainable economic growth. Considering these aspects, we think we have prioritized some areas for the sustained and inclusive economic growth in the context of our country. This is being envisaged in our policies, programs, as well as in the budgets, we are continuously implementing this agenda in our context. As my colleagues, Gunakar ji has already presented his opening presentations, that we have an credible success to achieve the high-level economic growth since 3 consequent years. It seems that this is being succeeded due to our policy interventions as well as our policy clarity and our priorities too. Having said that, I would like to highlight some points which will give our areas that we have already been prioritized for the sustained and inclusive growth. One is, first, infrastructure development. Without the infrastructure, that might be social, physical, as well as economic infrastructure, without the infrastructures, we cannot get the desired level of economic growth that is sustained and as well as inclusive growth. Next is connectivity, that is digital as well as physical connectivity. We are focusing on these areas, digital connectivity as well as physical connectivity. Through the physical connectivity, we are developing various efforts towards expanding our road networks, expanding our connectivity towards the air operations, expanding our connectivity through going to start from the railway networks and others. Whereas from the digital connectivity, we have developed digital Nepal framework guidelines. Through that guidelines, we are expanding our connectivity throughout the country and beyond the countries too. Third is transformations of the agriculture through the various intervention programs. Without transforming the agricultural systems, without transferring the existing agriculture system to the modern agriculture systems, we cannot achieve that sort of the desired outcomes. So we have initiated some sort of the systems that might be input subsidy, process subsidy, as well as output subsidy. And we are giving that sort of the importance through the mechanizations of our agriculture systems, market access to our economic systems, the agriculture system, that will also giving that sort of the opportunity for the expanding our economy. Next thing is developing vibrant market. In this context, I would like to highlight that product market, labor market, and financial market is going to be vibrating. It is creating that sort of the environment for creating the job. It is giving that sort of the opportunity for expanding our opportunities, as well as our economy is going to be expanded. Next things, we have focus on human capital development. Human capital development through various projects and programs, through skill development programs, interventions on their minimum wages guarantee program, their employment guarantee program, as well as their expanding their competency and capacity of the human capital for getting the desired results. Other things that we have initiated is sound and effective social security mechanism that is also giving supportive for the expanding our growth towards the transformation of that level who have the lower level of incomes that we have initiated earlier. And I would like to highlight some sort of the points that we are going to focus on how to accelerate that growth process, how to get the benefit from that economic growth in the context, and how to achieve double-digit economic growth that is being projected in 15th plan, and how to get the desired level of economic growth that is being projected in current fiscal year's budget. First, we have initiated and we have prioritized for the accessible modern infrastructure and intensive connectivity. As I earlier mentioned about what are the projects and what are the programs and what are the initiations that we have made. Again, I would like to highlight that some major projects for the infrastructure is going to be completed, going to be started, that will give some sort of the momentum for the growth that would automatically lead for creating that enabling environment for us. And next, high and sustainable level product and productivity, promoting and the sustainable productivity through the various productivity measures. Next thing is promoting the private sector. As my colleagues Farish already highlighted about what's the importance of the private sector for developing or creating the economic vibrations, that we have started some sort of the policy initiations. Our tax policy has been reformed, highlighting further, attracting the domestic as well as foreign private investment.
Sisirji, you have 1 minute left.
We have already amended FITA Act, we have amended PPP Act, and we have recently started offshore bond for inviting the foreign direct investment, as well as we have started the hedging facility for promoting that sort of the investment in the special sector. That is also giving some sort of the positive momentum for creating the growth. Another thing, last but not least, we have started fiscal federalism, and we have transferred the funds. About the 32% of the total budget has been transferred to the subnational government, which is also be very much influential, as well as applicable, as well as a productive sector investment for the creating job, as well as creating that sort of infrastructure over the subnational levels too. Having said that, we are in the right track. We are focusing on the growth potentiality. We are focusing on the growth-oriented aspects, creating, highlighting, as well as identifying the drivers of the economic growth in the coming plan, as well as budgets that is going to be enacted or going to be started for the next fiscal years too. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Shishir Kumar Dhungana, the Secretary, Ministry of Finance, the Government of Nepal. Thank you for your views. How do we get the sustainable and inclusive growth in the country? Basically, there are few points that he highlighted. Infrastructure development, digital connectivity, and the transforming the agriculture sector, vibrating the markets, and HR development, and social security theme, where the Nepalese government is investing on these areas, and it will definitely create a sustainable and inclusive growth in future. Now, we want to hear from Swarnim Wagle, the former vice chairman. Yeah, please, floor is yours.
Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, pleased to be here, and I'd like to thank the Rastra Bank for organizing this important conference. A lot of issues have already been covered, so I was struggling to find new things to say. So let me focus on 4 sets of remarks. First, on the imperative of high growth and some conceptual issues. The second set of remarks on the challenge of kickstarting and sustaining high growth. Third is on the likely new sources of economic growth in a lagging, landlocked LDC like Nepal. And if I have time, I'll conclude with why growth path is likely to be different in the new century, and how we'd have to start thinking in different terms. Now, I don't need to preach to this audience about the importance of economic growth, but I think if we assess the last 50 years of Nepal's development journey, I think 2 things really stand out. First is that when you compare Nepal with itself, if you compare the Nepal's development achievements with where we were 30, 40, 50 years ago, there's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot to acknowledge and a lot to be happy about, from literacy to life expectancy to per capita income to our infrastructure stock and all that. But if we compare Nepal with other countries that were like us only 30 years ago, we've really lagged behind. So the absolute picture is very positive when you compare ourselves with Nepal with ourselves. But the relative picture is one of disappointment. Countries that were like us, forget the Koreas and others that have really reached high income status, even countries like Cambodia and Bangladesh and Laos, which were like us just 15, 20 years ago, have really marched ahead. Nepal continues to see a very moderate and sluggish pace. The second story there, connected to the first one, is, again, there's a lot to celebrate on the social and the political front. I can think of no other low-income country in the world, at our current stage of development, that has struggled for example, full democratic freedoms. We've waged 3 revolutions in the last 70 years. It's a flawed democracy that we live in, but still, I think this is something to cherish. And together with those struggles, the agenda of inclusion, freedoms, spatial inequality, regional, ethnic inequities, we've made very earnest efforts to redressing them. So on the social and the political front, there's a lot to cheer. But it's the economic story there, again, where we are really lagging behind. So against this backdrop, I think we have to really expedite our economic journey. And this is where I hope this conference will add a lot of policy insights and all that. Over the last 50 years, we've hovered between 2 and 5% of average annual economic growth every decade. That's grossly insufficient for a country that is at a stage of development like us. We should be, a country at such a low level of development should be securing 7 to 10% of economic growth. And this, in the new era of political stability, I think this is going to be a legitimate aspiration, but we haven't yet built the foundations to embark on that high and ambitious growth trajectory. So this is where I think our focus should be oriented towards. And at the same time, issues of inequities, sustainability, and other issues are becoming much more important. So we no longer have the luxury of saying high growth. We have to adjectify growth. Already 20 years ago, we've been talking about jobless growth, ruthless growth, where it's captured by the elites, rootless growth, where the growth process is not anchored to our cultural identity, growth that is futureless, that compromises a lot of the environmental issues, and growth process that is voiceless, that doesn't engage the citizens. So once you are burdened with adjectifying growth, adding equitable growth or inclusive growth, sustainable growth, and all the other adjectives, the challenge is even bigger. This is where I think economists tend to look at what the poverty elasticity of growth is like for every unit increase in average economic growth, what percentage point of poverty reduction has taken place. Increasingly, the employment elasticity of economic growth is becoming much more prominent. For every additional unit of economic growth, how much jobs, how much you are creating. And here, recent estimates are not very encouraging for Nepal, where the employment elasticity is only less than 0.2. And we know for a fact that growth, spatial growth, is uneven. Coastal or urban areas tend to grow much more faster than regions than in the hinterlands. So conceptually, growth, attaining high and sustained growth has become much more challenging. Now, modern economic growth is a recent phenomenon. Humans have been around for almost 100,000 years, but modern economic growth as a sustained phenomenon has only been seen for the last 200 years. So for 99,800 years, economic growth was a rare phenomenon. Average economic growth actually before the 1820s was 0% in one decimal place, which means it took like 300 or 400 years to double per capita income. It's only in the recent centuries, or in the case of Asia, recent decades, that modern economic growth has been a recent phenomenon. So there's, in a sense, looking at other countries that have gone through this process, there's a lot to be learned. Let me remark briefly on this distinction between growth spurts and sustained economic growth. Now, it is quite easy to trigger growth. The challenge, the larger challenge, is in sustaining growth. And there are lots of papers that document growth spurts. There's a paper by Hausman, Pritchett, Roderick that documents around 83 episodes of growth accelerations, where compared to the previous five years, growth sort of picks up by 2 percentage points or higher. And then you sustain this for 7 to 8 years, and the resulting per capita increase is at least 3.5%. So if you use these filters and criterion, you can identify these concrete spells, growth spells, where many countries have achieved these kind of results. Even in South Asia, Pakistan went through this kind of a spell in the 60s, Sri Lanka in the late 70s after the liberalization boom, India in the 80s, and more recently in the 21st century. So there's a lot to be learned about how growth spurts or growth accelerations can be triggered. Now, when it comes to sustained growth accelerations, I'm talking about at least 7% for, let's say, 25 years or beyond. There's a famous report from the World Bank. Michael Spence has documented this, 13 actual cases in the post-Second World War period, when the countries that pulled off a miracle, beginning with Japan and ending with China. 9 of the 13 are in Asia. The other 4 are Malta, Botswana, Oman, and which are slightly insignificant because of the size of their economy, but Brazil sort of stands out, which went through a miraculous growth process between the 1950s and the 1980s. So there is something to be gleaned from the lessons that these countries, the group of 13, secured. The West and the Western offshoots, it took a much longer period. After 1820, they secured their present status over 200 years. So for us, for countries that are catching up, lagging countries like Nepal, I think this experience is exceptionally important. And they identify 5 common elements, emphasizing committed, capable governments, basically developmental states. They relied on markets for resource allocation. They amassed large investments and savings. They ensured macroeconomic stability, and they fully exploited the world markets for their exports, imports, and investments. In the long term, if you go beyond decades and talk about centuries, I think the larger story revolves around institutions. And here, the work of Acemoglu, Robinson, and others who look at 2 to 3 century-long processes, and they conclude that it's non-extractive political and economic institutions that tend to result in these big development payoffs, and they account for these large divergences in income per capita, especially after 1820, which is sort of looking at the last 200 years. But there's a big problem with relying too much on institutions. First of all, it's a black box. Almost everything goes into it. So when the policymakers, the secretaries of finance, and others are looking for immediate policy levers, it's not very useful. Sorry, I had timed myself, and let me just, I'll work towards wrapping this up. But the big problem with institutions, it takes a long time to set up, and it could be path dependent. Good institutions often are a result of development and not a cause. So, which goes first is an issue. And it's not very helpful from a policy perspective to argue that when you say to be rich, you need to look like rich countries. So it's not a very, very, very helpful policy prescription. So yes, the fundamentals matter, but surely there are ways to trigger these policy levers in the short run. And this is where the story of structural transformation comes into the picture. The move from low productivity activities to high productivity activities is, that involves new locations, new organizations, new technologies, starts to become very important. And again, here when we look at the idiosyncratic experiences of countries that have gone through these growth spells.
Swarnamji, I just say that to you.
I'll wrap up. So India, for example, the 80s growth takeoff was delicensing industrial activities under Rajiv Gandhi. China started with agriculture reforms, moving into these township village enterprises. Mauritius moved from sugar to garments. South Korea with their export orientation. So there's a whole set of sort of examples that we can look to when you look for one or two policy tweaks that can put on a path of high growth. Now, let me end with final thoughts. I'll skip the section on why the growth paradigm will look different in this century. I don't have time. But let me conclude with Nepal's road to inclusive growth. Again, we've hovered between 2 to 5%. We should be on a path of 7 to 10%, but we've not yet built those foundations. The last 2 years are an aberration, in my opinion. It's a rebound, as was mentioned earlier. And in agriculture, in manufacturing, in services, we need a complete new overhaul and reorientation if we want to achieve, forget 25 years of 7% growth, just even 10 years of 6 to 7% economic growth. Now, IMF tends to be a bit conservative. They're looking at 5, 6%. I think we can be moderately ambitious and aim for 6 to 8%, but you need to put in the building blocks. And this is where I think, the existing pattern of investment, both the quantity and quality, there needs to be a fundamental departure, both in the public and the private, domestic and the foreign investments. But I think if we want to go on a high path, we need to explore new sources of economic growth.
We have a question answer session also.
Okay. So number 1, digitalization. Number 2, niche agriculture. Number 3, energy intensive industries. Broaden the remit of landscape marketing and step much more on GVCs, location, and these trade and industrial policies, and make some strategic bets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swarnamji. Yeah, we really agree with you. Yes, you mentioned about the historical pattern of the economic and social development of the world, how the economy move ahead as a sustainable growth. You mentioned about given the different example of the country. Thank you so much. Now I would like to call on Honorable Ramkumar Fuyal, the Planning Commission, National Planning Commission member. Please, because we are running out of time, that's why I'm quite busy to get them stop on earlier.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable Governor of Government of Nepal, distinguished panelists on the dais, valued and distinguished delegates from in and out, valued participant, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning and namaste to you all. It's a great pleasure for me to be a part of this very important avenues. I'm very much thankful to the organizer for this golden opportunity. Things have already been explained, discussed, and briefly elaborated on the theme of inclusive and sustainable growth agenda for Nepal. So I don't want to repeat more on the way how, on the spirits, how the previous delegates have spoken. So I just would like to pick up some few points from the government prospects and how the National Planning Commission of Nepal has picked up this agenda as a leading agenda to transform the economic and social conditions of Nepal's from that perspective, I'll be just talking a few minutes on those agendas only. As we all know that Nepal has a very progressive constitutions, and this theme is also linked to our socialistic oriented economy, which is already envisioned in constitutions and the long-term vision of the government. So while we talk about the socialistic economic oriented states, we need to consider about two very important building blocks of the societies. Number one is economic prosperity, and number two is a social well-being. That economic prosperity can be achieved through economic transformations by using the available economic drivers of the country, and social transformation or social well-being or social welfare can be achieved through the proper use and materialization of the fundamental rights of the peoples that they are mentioned in our constitutions. So on that ground, government has come up with one national agenda that is considered as a national vision as well. That is prosperous Nepal and happy Nepali. So whole agenda that we have discussed today will be mapped under those two economic prosperity and social well-being agendas of a country. So I just would like to pick up these points and briefly let you know about our target. Then later we can hear or receive some questions from the participants, and if there is time, we'll respond on that. In the long-term vision of the government has a mission to achieve a very high economic growth and to gain a very high per capita income. Right now, our per capita income is around 1,4,700 US dollar at the moment, and after 25 years, we are targeting to achieve it 12,100 US dollar in the constant price. So this is one target. And the next target is the economic growth. As we are maintaining around 6.5 to 7% economic growth, after 25 years, we are targeting to achieve it into a double digits. And we are also targeting to maintain it. So we have a roadmap for that. So 15 periodic plan is a plan for making a background to generate the prosperity. So it will just work out to generate the prosperity, and next to 5 years periodic plan, which we have envisioned in a long-term vision, that is 15 and 16 periodic plan, will accelerate the prosperity and happiness. And next 2 periodic plans, they will be of 5 years each, will maintain the prosperity and happiness. It means we have a long-term vision which has already been discussed in our background paper at the beginning, presented by Dr. Bhatta, and similarly it was picked up by our finance secretary, and the rest of the distinguished speaker also have given the emphasis. This is the target, and while looking to the available resources and our economic drivers, on the prosperity side, how can we achieve the prosperity is a question. So on the prosperity, we have basically focused high and equitable national income is a foremost prioritized sector. Building human capital and complete use of population is another important sector that we have focused in the planning document. And similarly, universal and modern infrastructure, wide range of interconnectedness, the another sectors, and high and sustainable production and productivity is the final sector. So to achieve the economic prosperity, economic transformation is required while we fully utilize those sectors to achieve a high rate of growth, the prosperity and happiness is possible. On the other hand, we have the prosperity, and prosperity, well-being and decent life of people is another important sector, and civilized and just society, healthy and balanced ecosystem, good governance, comprehensive democracy, national unity and respects are the other 6 important sectors. From them will ensure the happiness. To mobilize them properly, we have also segregated some important economic drivers. For example, a modern infrastructure is one of the major vibrant economic drivers of a country. Similarly, quality human capital and complete use of them is the another sector. As we have known that we have the population dividend. So if we can properly manage or develop the human capital, then only the other resources can be utilized. Production and green economy, high productivity and competitive capacity, quality tourist services, well-managed modern urbanization, provincial and local economy. They are our main economic drivers. Whereas we have some enablers as well.
Ram Kumarji, 1 minute left.
A few enablers are also here. And these are the target indicators, economic drivers and enablers mentioned in our long-term vision, and they are also aligned in the 15th periodic plan. The main growth target of 15th periodic plan is to achieve 8% of the growth, and investment patterns are also forecasted. On investment pattern, not only the government side, private sectors, cooperative sectors, community sectors, and other different sectors investments are also forecasted. And through the proper utilization of that investment, our targeted achievement can be gained. And while talking about this target and the plans, we have some different roles. Federal government has one role, province government has another role, local government has another role, community, private sectors, cooperatives, they have also the different roles. So these roles are also properly defined in the planning documents. So based on their mutual coordination, cooperation and collaboration, hopefully our targeted indicators can be fully achieved, and cooperation from all sectors is highly welcomed. The latest works that we have performed are also associated with the planning documents. Especially, we were quite poor on data management, and we also did not have actual data on the disaggregated level. But now the government of Nepal has initiated developing the data on 3 tiers of government, and especially the National Planning Commission has prepared a national data profile, and there are so many surveys, so many census, and many of the other data generated works through study and innovations are also made. So hopefully, due to those all information, it will also help us to simply forecast our situations and to understand our real base of the economy. And finally, the thematic papers that will be presented today and tomorrow will come up with some insightful and commendable recommendation to achieve high growth, especially the inclusive and sustainable growth in Nepal. With this all, let me conclude my short note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ram Kumarji, the Honorable Member of National Planning Commissions. It's very hard to be a chair of this session, you know, it's eminent personality. They can speak an hour, so I have to stop them, sorry for that. So now that I think our participants and the audience, they came to know what dimension we go through for the sustainable and inclusive growth. Basically now, the participants, I want to take the few questions. Floor is yours. Please mention your name and institutions. Yes, sir, you front, yeah, please. Yeah, and just to whom?
Okay. Hello. My name is Anish Agrawal. I'm from Washington University in St. Louis. My question is to Dr. Sharneem Walkley. In your remarks, you suggested that the economic growth in the last 3 years we have achieved is an aberration and might not be sustainable. Just to point out, Mr. Fariz also suggested that the growth is accidental and primarily driven by remittance and demographic dividends. In addition, Dr. Louise also suggested that there is a gap in economic aspirations versus Nepal's economic reality. My question to you is, in your opinion, what is the single most important action that can allow Nepal to bridge this gap and why?
Thank you. Yeah, you from. Yeah. We'll take first question, then our panelists will give answers.
I'm Brij Raj, General Manager, Reserve Bank of India. My question is to the IMF country head. Sir, you mentioned in your address that IMF looks at how other countries, the experience in other countries. So given the technological transformation developments which are taking place, for Nepal, how do you think Nepal can leverage from the lessons of other countries, the technological developments there for improving economic growth and development in Nepal? Thank you.
And you please, yeah.
Prakash Rastra from Banking and Energy Sector. My question to Mr. ADB. Yeah, ADB. So, just
the question is
for you, yeah?
Please, loudly.
Yeah, Mr. Song. Yeah, because of this COVID-19, yeah, there is some sort of this micro and macro level behavior pattern is changing. Like people are shifting from their consumption habit and purchasing pattern. Even the government also shifting their focus from industry to some health-related industry. But at micro level, overall, around the 30% economy is going to be affected. At this moment of time, at this sort of situation, according to this conventional wisdom, what sort of economic policy we have to adopt? This is for you. Yeah, got it? And the next question to Mr. Faris is for the country manager, World Bank. We agree that challenge is not converted into opportunity, is a threat, yeah? But at what cost? You know, there is a phenomenon that we, being a part of this
just
planet,
brief, okay? Brief,
planet, we have to live this world for our future generation as it is now. So what is the trade-off between this economic growth and the climate change? What is the benchmark should be there? Yeah. And your question, मेरो हाम्रो आदरणीय सचिवज्यूलाई जुन अब हाम्रो यो यो भइरहेछ अहिले सिचुएसन यसले हाम्रो टुरिज्म र चाहिँ जुन रेमिटेन्स निश्चित रूपमा असर पर्नेछ यस्तो अवस्थामा अब आएर हामीले के कस्ता इकोनोमिक पोलिसीहरू अपनाउनु पर्ने जसले गर्दा ताकि भावी रूपमा हामीलाई चाहिँ यो दुर्घटनाबाट हामी बच्न सक्छ धन्यवाद
धन्यवाद लेडी फ्रम या
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Indrajit from Thapar University, Patiala, India. As rightly mentioned by Mr. Faris, that the solutions for the country development has to come from its own. My question is to Mr. Shishir Kumar Dhunangana and Honorable Ram Kumar Fayalji. The question is that as we know that we need to grow the small and medium sector enterprise, what Nepalese government is doing to achieve the sustainable growth in Nepal and how they are improving the business confidence index so that the youth of the Nepal is positively engaged in the sustainable economic activity and Nepal can have its own economic growth policy. Okay, thank you so much.
From this side, yeah, please see yourself.
My question to Dr. Wagle, I think we regard you very highly in terms of technical expertise and policy reform issues. My little bit question was picked up by the first question, the gentleman who raised the question. You mentioned as a discerning point in your concluding remarks that, the last 2 years are aberrations. Is it implicating that the whole the growth rate is an accidental? It limits only to that, or it limits some policy aberrations, in real policy aberrations in terms of sustainability and growth? My second question to the IMF gentleman, the pegging with Indian currency, do you see a real long-term hazards arising out of that? Thank you.
Thank you. And any from back? Back, I'm asking from back side. This side. Back. Do you have any question from back? From this row? We have only one question from this row.
Thank you. My name is Omnath Gaire. I'm a student of economics. And we have talked about the inclusiveness and sustainability, and the equally important aspect is missing there. And I would like to ask the questions to the government, our secretary and the member of the planning commission. Diversification of the economic opportunities. Without diversification of economic opportunities, we cannot attain the sustainable growth. If we talk about the recent growth pattern, that is also kind of accidental, and that is coming from the construction, heavy investment in construction sectors, and how sustainable it would be. That is a big question. Then what are the government plans or policies that is guided to diversify the economic basis of the country? That's it. Thank you.
Now, the panelists, they will have 1 minute for each questions. I hope that they will complete it. Let us start from this side. Sean? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. And what kind of economic policies I could recommend you to report? I think from my 3 points. So basically, the state should provide the supporting role, reduce its print in the economy, to reduce subsidies, to reduce the number of SOEs in the economy, and then to provide incentives for the private sector. Second, to make the market work better, and to reduce the entry barriers to different sectors, to let the private citizens to conduct economic activities. The government is just to provide facilitating roles. So private sector development is extremely important. Third, you have to open to foreign direct investment, reduce the barriers, and open trade. Although probably Nepal needs tariffs, duties to support the budget, but in many respects, the free entry of the goods and services should help you a lot. Thank you. I'll stop here.
We've heard repeatedly that the economic growth rate has averaged around 7% in the last 3 years. I reject the first one because it came in the aftermath of the earthquake and the blockade, when the economic growth rate was just a little above 0%. So when you have a shrunk base, it's very, very easy to rebound. In a normal year, that was a growth rate of around 4.5%. So if you reject that, the last 2 years, it's correct. It's around 6.5% and above, close to 7%. There's a lot of confusion that gets narrated, whether it's at market prices or basic prices, whether there's been some data massaging and all that. I don't want to go into it, but let's take it at face value that it's 7%. The IMF colleague is here. They've already moderated it to around 6% this year, and the long-term trajectory is, given Nepal's capacity, is 5 to 6%. But is this our destiny? No. That's not our destiny. At our level of development, $1,000 per capita, we should be growing from 7 to 10%. But it needs the policy environment to be much more supportive. Here, I just highlighted 2 things. What do you do with the existing modes of investments in agriculture, in manufacturing, the remittance-propelled services industries? I think there's a lot to be done there, both on the quantity and the quality. I do give some credit to the current government for trying to enhance the efficiency of investments. I think the finance minister is quite sincere. He's trying his best. But the supportive infrastructure is not there yet. My worry is, if you want to make this leap from a historic trend of around 4% decadal economic growth to 7%, 8%, 9%, 10%, and start talking about sustaining it for 23, 25 years, as is the government's objective, to go to $12,000 per capita, you need an average annual growth of 11%, close to 11% for the next 25 years, a feat that no other country in the world has ever achieved, not even China, right? So, it defies credibility a little bit to when we claim, like we do in other spheres, that Nepal or कसैले दुनियाले नगरेको चमत्कार नेपालले गरेर देखाउँछ. If you believe in poetry, that's fine, but if you believe in numbers, I think it's going to be difficult. So what's my plea? Let's focus on new sources of economic growth that will take us to that higher trajectory. Many countries have done it. I mentioned the third group of 13. The good news is 13 countries have done it. The bad news is only 13 countries have done it. So, there's different, but new sources of economic growth should be our focus, and I hope the government will spend a lot of time over the next 3 years to really plant seeds. This is not going to be something that's going to be achieved overnight, but you can plant these seeds that will lead to new sources of economic growth. And I had mentioned in my speech 5 concrete areas where we need major policy departure that can take us to this higher trajectory.
We are quite optimistic to achieve the growth that is targeted in our vision and planning document. Even though Dr. Wagle has argued on so many ways, and this is also the fact, because he has always talked from the data and the fact. But the scenario is different. We have targeted to invest more on infrastructure sectors. Primary sectors are given more importance. So we believe that upon completion of our national priority projects, many of them are about to be completed in a few years. The targeted 8.5% of growth rate of that 15th periodic plans is possible. As far as we talk about the long-term targeted growth rate, it's a projection. We have made a projection by using our available data and sources. We also did a backward forecasting, and through the backward forecasting, we have estimated a scenario and trend. So it's a government decision and a government document. So we are committed to achieve that double-digit growth within 25 years, and we have to work hard to maintain it, number one. Number two, no doubt, we need to find new areas of revenues for expanding our economy. Not only from income side, but also the resources side. For example, if we believe on our remittance and if we just depend on our tax revenue only, the targeted growth rate can't be achieved. So we have to find new sources of income. For that, the government is working. Number third, we have mentioned that we are working on transforming the economy. Agricultural sector's contributions is slowly decreasing. We have target to decrease, and industrial sector's achievements and contribution to the GDP is targeted quite high. So entrepreneurship development, infrastructure development of the industries, for example, like SEZ, industrial zone, industrial corridors. For them also government has allocated huge amount on its investment plan. And yearly we are targeted to grow 60,000 entrepreneurs, and basically more than 60% of them will be engaged on SMEs. So I guess the industrial sectors also will be enhanced like this. So our target to grow and to develop is primary and secondary sector of the economy. And we would be working to maintain the third service sectors in the condition as we have now. Thank you.
Thank you for questions. I think I have to respond to 3 questions, whereas Honorable Member has already described about the questions too. Come up to MSME, we have initiated some sort of the promoting MSME programs, supporting for that is interest subsidy, credit facilities, startup facilities, as well as the tax incentive systems has been already been introduced. Market support is being provided to them, and many the training and entrepreneurship development oriented program has been initiated for promoting these SMEs for the sustained economic growth. That's why we are in the right path that the economy should be translated, might be translated into the sustained path through the developing MSMEs. Next thing is diversifications of the economy. You are rightly pointed out that how our honorable member has already described. Our economy and economic sector should have a focus on searching for that sort of the enabling sector which can be able to give that sort of the result for expanding our the growth, sustainability of our growth too. So we are searching for new areas of interventions, like the service sector, and which include inside the service sector too. What are the probable areas that we will get the more benefits and more encourages areas for the our economic growth that we are searching? I don't think so that that is the construction sector will be in the saturation point. We have to maintain. And we have to construct a high level of infrastructure, huge infrastructures for the sustained growth. We have to construct for the infrastructure like the high energy projects. We have to construct for the connectivity projects and others too. So still they have the opportunity for giving that sort of the contributing role for the economy. And the next things might be the other sector, that means the digital sector and other sectors will be also. So far, third questions regarding to probable issues that is we should have to be encountered. I don't think we should have to be we should face that most challenges sector, but still we have some sort of the problem, external as well as the internal problems we have. How to make the effective public spending. That is the questions for us for the effective transformation of the government-led project into the reality. We have still some sort of the problems regarding to that is the how to translate our own homegrown economy through the developing the industrial sector. That is our next issues for our that is the challenges for our economy. And sometimes some sort of external factors like into the COVID-19 and other factors is also be very much considerable factors that will be hinder for our growth as well as sustainability matters. That's why it is not to be very serious in this regard. However, we should have to be very cautiously and operate in these factors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent questions. I think I have two brief ones. On the leveraging technology, well, that has many facets. There's a lot of information in the internet. And let me just mention two very quick ones. One very big country and one very small. As you know, your neighbor to the south, India, has put a lot of resources into technology. They have a digital India strategy. And in the private sector, they've developed a platform, a technological platform that connects all forms of money, electronic, debit, credit, online banking, into one platform called UPI, which many countries in the world are looking at to try to emulate. So in that sector, in fintech, for example, India has moved very, very far. There's another country, very small, that has also done a lot to technology, and that is Estonia, moving up many, many public services to the internet and reduce paperwork, corruption, and so forth. So that's a small country in Europe and a large country in Asia that used big bets on leveraging technology to improve public services. Now, in terms of the private sector and even the public sector more generally, the one reality now is that people, especially young people, those that will live longer, will need to study all of their lives. They will have many different jobs. There are many studies by these consulting firms like McKinsey and so forth that talk about the X percentage of jobs that will disappear and Y percentage that will increase. The bottom line is we need to become students all of our lives. And that means having very strong foundations, very good primary education, which in your country is linked to fiscal federalism. So you're working on 3 or 4 things that will have a major impact in the future of your country.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you again for all the good questions. Let me first answer the one on this issue of accidental, and I actually do hope, I suspect, but I hope you didn't misunderstand what I was saying. It was incidental, it was accidental. In a sense, there's no such thing as accidents in the world. The point that we have to make, and this is actually very consistent with what the Honorable Minister was saying in the first point, is what is the Nepal of the past? And he referred to the new Nepal. Nepal of the past, and this is something I think all of you deserve a lot of credit for, is a country that was emerging from some degree of conflict. A decade of political uncertainty, very high turnover of consecutive governments, followed by a devastating, absolutely devastating earthquake, devastating floods, etc., and still you remained resilient. In that context, the base upon which the Nepali economy was to survive and thrive was not diversified and had a very low base. As a result, you were takers of what was happening accidentally to the world outside you. If GCC or Malaysia decided to have a different policy on labor, foreign labor, your economy would have been and continues to be subject to that. That is incidental, accidental, and exogenous. The demographic trend, although one would argue, being cheeky, that there is action of individuals, is not a policy, and we'll leave that as that, is not a policy of the government. As such, it is accidental and outside. Now you have an opportunity which has been exercised by the government to actually move from accidental exogenous forces to strengthening and developing and widening and deepening your economic base So you don't have to rely on these exogenous factors to a large extent, and that's the point I wanted to make. And that has been happening. I think I would give credit. This isn't an issue of playing politics. This is pure facts and figures. You have had growth from a low base in the past. You have gone from accidental now to deliberate growth, and the objective is to move from deliberate to sustainable. This is the issue. Over the past couple of years, let's remember the facts, and these are facts. Doing business indicators you have ranked before 110, now you're ranked at 94. That's an improvement. Fiscal federalism has been unfolded in a very productive way. That is an accomplishment. Your growth is consistently more driven by services, and even agriculture. That's actually positive. So the idea is how to consolidate this and move forward and transfer this to something where you rely less on accidents and more on deliberate, and I think this is what the government's doing and deserve a lot of support. Last question very quickly on the issue of sustainability. Of course, I mean, I view things in my very simplistic mind in a triangle, right? And it's hard to optimize. So on one side you have growth, the other you have equity, and the third you have sustainability. So where do you put that pin and needle? And that is a subject to each country to determine based on its own mandate. Thank you.
Thank you all panelists. Well, I have a few and queries to the panelists, but I am not going to ask them. I have my views also, but I am not going to tell you my views because we are running out of the time, because it's sustainable and inclusive growth itself has become a top priority for the policy development in all the country. So it remains. So we have to go through it, and we have to achieve our goal in a different model, in different way, that you all listen it to our panelists. Thank you so much, all the panelists, and active participations of all the delegates. And our lunch is ready. Please get your lunch, and our session will start after lunch. And I think we have to give some token of love, yeah?
So I'll continue, sir.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you, sir.
go on.
Thank you all the respected panelists and paper presenter for your insightful presentation and knowledge sharing on markets, foreign direct investment, young labor forces development, digital connectivity, economic growth, and more for sustainable growth of Nepal. Thank you, Chair of the session, for chairing the session. Thank you all the participants for your active participation and making the session more productive and fruitful. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to request the Chair of the session, Honorable Governor Dr. Chiranjeevi Nepal, to grace the panelists with khada and present the souvenirs. Dr. Ram Kumar Fuyal, Honorable Member of National Planning Commission. Dr. Swarnim Wagle, former Vice Chairman of National Planning Commission. Mr. Sisir Kumar Dhungana, Secretary, Ministry of Finance. Dr. Lele Song, South Asia Regional Advisor of Asian Development Bank. Dr. Louis A. Brewer, IMF Senior Resident Representative for India, Nepal, and Bhutan. Mr. Faris Haddad Jarvas, Country Manager of the World Bank Group, Kathmandu, Nepal. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an announcement. We have switched the time for the next parallel sessions and lunch. We break for lunch after this session. Our parallel session starts sharp at 1:30 p.m. Please note that the parallel sessions will take place simultaneously in 3 different halls, that is Darbar Hall, Platinum Hall, and Crystal Hall. I humbly request all our guests to participate in the parallel sessions. The first parallel session will begin at 1:30 to 3 p.m. In the first session at Darbar Hall, The theme for presentation is Economic Growth and Macroeconomic Stability. The session chair will be Professor Dr. Ram Prasad Gyawali. The first session at Crystal Hall, the theme for the paper presentation is Monetary Policy. The session chair will be Mr. Naur Bahadur Thapa. The first session at the Platinum Hall, theme for the paper presentation is Tourism, Remittance and Migration. The session chair will be Dr. Kusum Sakya. The second sessions will begin at 3:30 to 5 p.m. In the second session at Darbar Hall, the theme for paper presentation is Energy, Climate Change and Environment. The session chair will be Mani Nepal, Dr. Mani Nepal. In the second session at Crystal Hall, the theme for paper presentation is Industrial Development and Entrepreneurship. The second session chair will be Dr. Lele Song. In the second session at the Platinum Hall, the theme for paper presentation will be Financial System, Financial Stability and Corporate Governance. The session chair will be Mr. Sukhvinder Singh. If you require any assistance, please reach out to the NRV staffs with green name tags. Now we adjourn for lunch. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day ahead. Namaste.